Chris, I wanted to say, I mean, we've got UGM literally just round the corner now, and obviously you're attending. It's your first UGM, which we're very much looking forward to hosting you on. I thought this would be an opportune time for you to kind of introduce yourself. Darren obviously is a well-known name at the UGM, sociable guy, and obviously gets around, but you'll be new to that scene. So could you just give me a couple of minutes on who you are and what you do there at Yabbit?
Yeah, happy to. I think outside of being a terrible gardener, Scott, at home, I'm the CEO for the group. So I guess I work in under Darren, looking after the team. So everything from, I guess, pre-sales, engineering, our product development, direct selling, of course, and supporting our sales engine, for a better word. And really trying to, I think, from our market perspective, trying to bring a fresh view, in this market segment. I think I'm into my mid 40s now, and to me, it's actually an industry that needs a healthy amount of change. So, everything from product, development to service delivery to the sales function, and also trying to position our partners as well. And NetSapiens play a crucial role in that for us at a network and ecosystem level. By trade, just by way of history, I think Scott, engineer by trade, spent about 15 years doing a lot of IP routing roles and built networks and operated networks. And I was really lucky to meet a brilliant English lecturer in my last year at university, and she encouraged me to do one more year and said the internet might be quite big. Famous last words, and she was such a great lady. So I went through that process, and really in Australia, I guess the great segue to where we are now is I saw the Australian telecommunications industry deregulate in 1996 or 1997, I think it was, and that was a time when the largest incumbent being Telecom, which is now Telstra, literally deregulated. So we had competition open up for the first time in the late 90s. So we had the likes of Facebook and internet really becoming prevalent in the market, but we also had a telecommunication industry that was pretty much run by an incumbent, like a public service really, in telecom, completely open up, and saw some amazing things up to Y2K in the year 2000, and then beyond that I sort of moved into more private sector orientated roles, a couple of CIO roles and a couple of GM roles in and around the industry. And I guess I've seen it from all angles, which has been really nice. I've seen it from a disruption angle. I looked after Telstra's enterprise team in Queensland for some time and saw the challenges of incumbency and a slower product development engine, and also seeing what private sector looks like, where you are in the front line selling and maintaining clients. So yeah, it's been a really cool ride, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd be interested to touch on that and try and compare and contrast your market, and Australia is highly competitive as well. So how you're adapting as an independent service provider in that market, I'd be very curious to understand the challenges that you're facing and how you're overcoming those. But in regard to the UGM, what is the thing that you're seeking to achieve most of all when you're over there? I mean, the great networking events and all that kind of stuff, but what's the thing that you're most looking to get out of the show?
I think I don't think I know actually. Our daily experience in the NetSapiens community is extremely strong. From engineering to the people we touch, including our work with you, Scott, it's always terrific. I think from a geographic point of view, being in a market which is geographically some ways from some of the larger European or American markets, this presents an opportunity, I think, to be face to face with some people at a key moment. So, whilst I'm a huge video and remote working mobility advocate, I think from a collaboration point of view, and you've got some seriously smart people in the room who are trying to evolve their own ecosystems and go to market, just the ability, I think, over a 4 or 5 day period, at speed to actually interact with people, and just what that can sort of generate in a short time frame is really exciting. I've done a bit of research. I guess the engineer in me, Scott, doesn't die young. So, as a parent, I think anytime you're away from your kids and family, you want to make that worthwhile as well, and that's part of, I guess, who I am. So I've done a fair bit of research, and I look at a few of the partners. I think Rev.io, they're called. We interviewed last year a nice 8 or 9 minute piece on their journey with NetSapiens, and I know they provide a really cool billing orchestration tool. Been a partner of NetSapiens for 8 or 9 years, and I can see they're actually involved in the sales cycle. So that's an example for me of someone I'm probably going to seek out to understand what it was like for them before they got involved at a deeper level, and again, just the opportunity to collaborate. And I think sometimes too, which I've mentioned to you before as well, Scott, that, sometimes people outside of your natural markets, geographically in different places or in different time zones, or dealing with different supply and demand conditions like we are in Australia here, we may just provide a different insight and a different lens to the larger communities in the US as well, and just provide a point of difference, and that will help grow the community as well. So yeah, pretty excited to be, I think, with people to listen, share, learn, and to do that in a condensed fashion, I think, is when you can get some really cool ideas come out of that process. So for me, that's what it's all about. And I think having access to some people that normally are brilliant on video, but being able to go a bit further with them and have a few sketch sessions and a few test and see sessions around product will be awesome.
Yeah. And share a cold one or two by the pool doesn't help. Doesn't hurt either. Does it?
I think so. Yeah.
Just a case of kind of unlocking the creative juices. But to your point, I think it's very well made. Is that the thing I've always found about the UGM is it's predominantly owner-operators, C-level attendees that appear, but they're entrepreneurial in nature. I'm a fan of entrepreneurs, having been one myself over the years. The passion that they show for their businesses, I think, is unrivaled. And I think their running of an independent service provider community, I think, is something that has been kind of under threat, I guess, in over the last kind of decade, by the rise of what is monolithic big tech. We at NetSapiens obviously champion that independent service provider community. We feel our role in that is giving them the tool set that they need in order to be able to not just survive in this market, but thrive in that market by shaping solutions and services in their own image, because nobody knows their customers better than these service providers, that actually send people to site, that bother to sit down with their customers, listen to their challenges that they have, and then try and augment something that fits, the needs and the requirements of their end users. I mean, are you seeing some of that in Australia, that it's a one-size-fits-all approach that's being taken by a generic market? I mean, I know you've invested heavily in your brand, which is about customer experience, and it's about, delivering high-value solutions to people. But does that echo in Australia as being, one of the challenges?
Yeah, it certainly does. I think it's a really good question, because it can have, a very generic standard sort of answer, which is not, necessarily a bad thing depending on the person's experiences, right? But this is a big one for me. Like, the meetings we've had prior, Scott, I've enjoyed talking about this with you, and I think this is really big. And I say that because I think you're right. The big tech versus ISP view, and I guess if you've consumed it and you've managed it and you've possibly led or worked at a reasonable level of responsibility in an incumbent, or what I call an oligopolist, someone it's a long term for someone who sets the price and makes the market wait for what it might need right there and then. I think if you've experienced all that, this is why it's such a big moment. And yes, I do see that, and I'll tell you why. The analogy for me is probably best explained from a musician's point of view. Like, we all love, I love music. So NetSapiens, if you just picture a stage, the NetSapiens ecosystem for me is like the world's best roadie. All the infrastructure and ecosystem that sits beneath the stage, behind a curtain, unseen by many, is just a brilliant platform on which you can actually deliver a service. I'm trying to instill with my guys that are not technical that the Yabbit platform, for example, we've built on top of that, is almost like a set of instruments. And if you can get the customers to play the instruments the right way, it can be very powerful and form a really, really cool outcome. And my comparison here is that in the big tech space, I see the big tech space almost like, the $200 Casio organ that is already on stage, has plenty of buttons, and you can get some different tunes out of it, but it's already pre-done. So where I'm going with this derivative is that big tech is pre-done, and possibly pre-done on what they think the end user might need or the customer might need. And there's not a lot of live-to-live product development or evolution happening. They'll give you a product which might be 80% okay. It's serve the customer. I think customer service versus customer experience are two different things. versus the ISP who's got a great set of ears, gets intimately involved, and can, in the terms I use, Scott, is can real world the value. So an example might be, we look at the API fabric, that NetSapiens delivers us, into Yabbit. The way it can plumb into CRMs is hugely powerful. So we've had a chat with a medical client who wants to poke their CRM into our database to produce a call lookup, one patient journey. Now, the real world of that is that literally this clinic now can take an incoming call from a patient, and if everyone in the clinic is actually busy on a call, that call is now presented to a different clinic 100 kilometers away. It's actually a different brand, but that call can now be taken with, "Good afternoon, Scott. You must be calling Las Vegas. You've landed in Nevada. Your 2:15 appointment is okay for tomorrow. Can I help you in any other way?" And that has changed someone being on hold, transferred, potentially called back into a 20-minute, what I call high intimacy call scenario. So that's a good example where there's awesome value in that, but that's not a predetermined product. That is Yabbit with NetSapiens, an active set of ears with the customer, and knowing that the value to the customer is patients don't have a lot of time to sit on long medical center calls at 2 PM. That's probably a parent going to school pickup or someone trying to get back from their lunch break. So just being able to real world that experience. I think that's why, to your question, that's why the ISP is so important, because the ISP has time and has intention and has an understanding of value that the larger companies don't. Possibly the larger entities are preempting their tech, spending a whole load of money on marketing to try and push a belief that their tech gives the most value, and
Yes.
that to me is not quite right.
I know.
And the ISP is more intrinsic.
Yeah, I love your analogy. I think it's absolutely spot on. And again, the other thing, which again I don't think margin and profit is a dirty word at all, but it's certainly that if you can create and shape something in your image around your customers' needs and understanding, you're not in a commoditized game any longer. You've moved beyond that. If you stay within experience as opposed to service, your margins are much stronger. You as an organization are much better off to help and obviously serve your customers further through those things, and your customers don't feel there's any pain in that, because they've had a great experience delivered for them as well. And I that is something, Chris, that I see in conversations all over the world, is that when I look at a lot of our high growth service providers that are seeing margin improvement in their models and seeing growth well beyond the 18% that we see globally, as well, they all have embraced that ability to take all of the the levers that they can pull within the NetSapiens platform to have really deep and engaging conversations with either their their reseller partners or within their direct enterprise models that they would have, and create unique service propositions that are genuinely fit for purpose and delivering value through it, integrating it with other things as well that maybe proprietary to themselves. I was going to say, I'm also fascinated by, and Darren and I did touch on this, was the I guess the real investment that you have made in trying to create a brand there, like Yabbit. I mean, as I say, we're champions of that independent model. I know, I think, through personal experience, kind of previous roles, the challenges that are incumbent in trying to create a brand, particularly a technology brand, is, why is that important to you?
Yeah, I think, and I'll come back to your previous point about, profits and revenue not being dirty words, because you're 100% right. So, and that will probably end my answer here, actually, in a way. Why is it important? I think from a Yabbit point of view, Scott, like I'm sure every startup or new brand has probably had the intentions to be similar. But I think what Darren's done very well is it's important to have an identity. So, without taking you through a laconic sales training course, we all know there's so many ways of selling. But I think, you need to have an identity. And if your identity can start with differentiation that is reasonably valuable, that's a good thing. So I think with Yabbit and what Darren's created, Darren's very clear on what, I guess, ingredients he wants in the cake. So the cake is Yabbit and it's nicely iced and delivers value, but he's really clear on the ingredients. So some of the things, are to really take it to the big guys, to take it to the big providers, not in an adversarial way, but on behalf of the small, medium enterprise, but also the large enterprise who feel like they're being given that product we talked about before, where it just rolls off the assembly line and you don't really have much say in how you receive it. And then you think, gee, that little widget would be lovely, and you've got to wait 6 months and pay for more licensing to get that. So first of all, it's taking it to the big guys. The second thing he's done is he's really built the company around culture. And this is an interesting term because it's a bit like the word innovation, which I tongue-in-cheek say to my year 12 daughter. That's an overused word at times for me. Innovation sometimes can be doing what you do really well and really efficiently. It became a buzzword for about 5 years. I think what's innovative about us is we try and cut to the customer value statement really quickly and very community orientated. So the second part of our brand is probably, Scott, that by being community orientated, we look for people that are probably sitting in the minors in terms of their attitude to big products, and we work with them because we think they're a shared voice. I can think of a couple of CEOs as I'm talking to you that are sitting in really big brands, and they're having conversations with Darren and I now because they genuinely feel like our mindset and our DNA is more like for like than the account director or even the general manager or exec director of their incumbent, who's got very different drivers. Their drivers are big tech, big profits. We're a bit more, I guess, innovative around the way we think. So that's probably the second one. And I'd say the third thing is the reason why it's important is because the industry needs it. So back to your margins and profits aren't a dirty word. You are 100% right. I think people are actually okay with people making great margins and great profit because I think what I was taught in the late 90s holds. And a man said to me once, that cost is only an issue in the absence of value. Of all the statements I've heard over the years, it is so true. So people will start interrogating a bill or an invoice if they don't see value in the service. And on the flip side, if we go back to our medical center analogy, the fact that we've turned a 3.5-minute call in that case to a 30 or 40-second call also frees up resources for incoming bookings. And at say an average of $100 a patient booking, they were missing 190 calls a day. They're now missing 4. So their conversion rate might be 1 in 15, 1 in 14. We've worked out they're picking up 4 to 6 consults a day, and $600 to $800 to $1,000 of new consult revenue for a little practice every day is $250,000 of annuity a year, just making a small change. So I think to your question about brand, brilliantly led by culture, able to hear everyone. We believe a good idea can come from a junior coding tech as much as it might come from a VP. Second part is to be outwardly different, and we're probably, or we are, I think, more comfortable, Scott, with unknown and change. We deal with that really well because it's the nature of an entrepreneurial business. And the third one is that we can real world our value pretty quick. I'm not sure you should have to read through a brochure around a product and then try and work out where the value sits. I should be able to say to you, talk me through what you do. And I'm often asked by younger staff members, Scott, which is so great. They'll ask me, how do you sell Yabbit? And my answer is I don't. I actually talk about what the ecosystem can do. And Yabbit and probably our underlying pricing structure is one of the last things I talk about, because if there's value, then we can talk about that at the end. I think that's a better way. Communicate your value rather than sell your product, for me, is always a better way. And that applies to me at home. I had some doors replaced here a couple of years ago, and I'll tell you now, I still laugh about it because I had 2 gentlemen come and replace a front screen door on my property, and there was $2 difference between them. And one guy came in and he actually asked me about the use of the door, how many times the kids left it open, what was annoying about the last door, and he just gave me a slightly different locking mechanism which had a clicking sound to let the kids know when the door was appropriately closed. And he was here for 40 minutes. I said, oh mate, thanks for hearing me. I thank you for hearing me, because I'm happy to pay the extra $2.
Yeah. It's an interest. I'm smiling because that's a good story, but also on my journey, obviously getting to meet many of you guys in various different countries as well. this is such a common thing that I'm kind of seeing, is that it is where NetSapiens seems to be resonating with people is to your roadie analogy, is I've used kind of clay and bricks kind of things, is that we give people the opportunity to be able to shape things, to solve issues that allows them obviously to produce great outcomes which aren't price derived. What I do think sometimes the industry kind of faces is, even if they have that ability to mold, you've got to have that mindset. You've got to have that curiosity to understand and ask the right questions inside of your customer bases, and really kind of figure out what the DNA of that value architecture is. And I do think sometimes the industry as a whole, and it suffers, I think, from, they've got this absolutely unbelievable flexible solution now exists, and it's almost, what do I do with it? Or they happen on rather than creating, if you like, a buckets of relatively large scale solutions which are different, is they try to do them on individuated bases, make great money out of those individuated problems that are being solved because they can do that, but not then thinking about, how do I address this particular vertical? How do I replicate this time and time again, but just apply it to a different type of business? Those kind of things.
I agree completely. I think like the larger led tech, if you just think about the conversation type, the larger led tech is, can I ask the customer as many questions as I can, and I'll simply retrofit some of the customer's answers into my product to try and find value to sell my product. The ISP-led discussion is, I truly want to understand what the opportunities and problems might be, and I'm happy to give you my product, but actually maneuver my product and solution through end to end to address the situation. We also typically might say the word no, which is unheard of in sales. ISPs are far more likely to say, no, we don't do that. Here's no but. And that's another strength of NetSapiens. I find the whole no but is terrific. So we come to NetSapiens, have a question, we ask, and we'll get at a system level, no, but if you thought about it this way, and it just feels more congruent to collaboration. So again, it's, I think you can tell when you're in front of a big tech company account management kind of session and they're looking to grow white space in their account. But again, they're asking questions to try and find something they can fit in your world into their predetermined product. When I walk in the door, I'm trying to see if there's something that I might be able to address with my ever-changing product and solution that might work for them. And I think that's really crucial. Like in the sales cycle, I think you can waste a lot of time trying to fit a customer to your product. You can move very quickly if you don't go in there pitching product to a client. And that's what I try and train the younger guys on, is just be open-minded. Just be open-minded, and you'll find that your product should and will evolve very quickly if you don't predetermine what you think people want. It's a bit like a website. We've got a great digital company, Scott, that do our digital footprint stuff down here in Oz, and conversations with their owner have been similar. Websites are a really interesting commodity when you think about it, because a web developer might be reporting to an internal stakeholder or someone of a quite high order who's running the budget. But ultimately, a website is something being built by an organization. It's not for them. It's for the outside world. Yet the internal measurement might constantly be internal. So I often say, from a sales point of view and a NetSapiens Yabbit perspective in our world, your target is actually not the competitor. Your target is to get your hands on as much of the customer's discretionary budget spend that is applied to technology, because they see huge value in what you do. So, rather than walking in with a battle card of competitor X does this and they do that and I do this, no, you're actually targeting their budget. And if you target the budget from an expenditure point of view, you've got to target that with value. And in my experience so far, in the last 12 months in particular, we have very open book discussions. You mentioned, what was the word you used? Almost individuality, the individualizing items. That's a really good point, Scott, because I have found, and I think Darren should be commended for this, we have a very simple Yabbit licensing structure within which you get a whole range of capability. There is no plus more down the track. This comes along, and we get into healthy sprints with customers where every month we'll share and go back and try and refine. It's awesome when you talk unified comms on a global platform with a local Aussie provider, high-end security, so they can move any content around our ecosystem, medical, legal, really important. But when they know that any developing tools are inside their license and there's no more to pay, there's just an experience to be had, that's really positive, because incumbents are probably fearing revenue erosion, margin erosion. They're not geared necessarily to give the customer more capability unless there's dollars attached to it. So I think sometimes it's actually a way of thinking. If you can back yourself to map to the customer's issues really well, listen well, back to our musical analogy, Scott, orchestrate, be the orchestra, be the guy who can teach the customer to pick up the tools and the instruments and play them in a way that you can produce something so unique. They will continue to invest in your business and give you more of that discretionary spend, because they know that you'll drive value back into the organization rather than just being an OPEX item.
Yeah. One last one, Chris, that I had for you, which, again, value your feedback on it, is...
Yes, we did win the Ashes. I can confirm we won the Ashes.
Well, you did win the Ashes, yeah, but technically it was a draw for me. So,
and look, tongue in cheek, when you said the weather has broken nicely over here, I was quite happy for you, mate. But a part of me was like, I'm glad it didn't break in the fourth test on day 3. That wasn't the problem.
Yeah, if we'd had some decent weather, I think that urn would be back with us, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So the thing I wanted to ask, which was basically about, I guess, the demographic shift as Generation X starts to retire out of the market. Millennials are the dominant part of the workforce now. And I know you work with some very big enterprises. Government is a big part of your portfolio of customers that you kind of go after. Are you seeing any differences in basic buying behavior? I hear, from my colleagues in the US, and some of it definitely echoed from what I see in the UK and in Europe, that there is a different approach, essentially, to that whole buying process within essentially the structural kind of stuff that when I was kind of coming through the ranks as a man in his 20s and all that kind of stuff, is that there was a kind of playbook for the way that you would engage with people. It seems to be being torn up. So just in terms of examples in sales journeys, what we're seeing is that these millennials often have done enormous amounts of research on your organization before you ever get to talk to them. So they know so much about your business before you're having that first call with them. They've done the research on the websites. They've again, then this is partly going back, I think, down to that brand building exercise as well, is that they feel that they have a good intimate knowledge of your capabilities and who you are and what you represent before they even come to the table and sit down and go, these are my requirements. But also they seem to be very open in terms of, if you think you can change anything and make it better, have at it as well.
Yeah, I've seen huge change, to be honest. I think the buying behavior has changed, but possibly more importantly for me, it's the buying persona that has changed. And so by that I mean everything you mentioned there is spot on. Digital literacy is at an all-time high, number of devices per person, the internet, COVID, mobilization, the industrialization of mobility for anyone from 5 years of age to 105, really. So with that in mind, it's the buying persona that's changed. And to answer your question directly, at 46 years of age, I find it very interesting because the 56 and 66 demographic above me are a certain persona. But what I do see coming behind me is, in terms of generic age groups, is that these people in their late 20s, early 30s that are having a very different experience. Their buying personas are quite different. So I've got my oldest child is 17. We're talking about a digital generation that will buy a home, potentially start a long-term relationship, make serious investments, make serious career decisions, potentially even move house without actually physically being involved in any of it off a screen. The real estate market, for example, virtual tours, where I'm seeing three-dimensional virtual tours now is how people are viewing properties to then make a bid and get in first. So they tend to be happy to fail fast. They will make digital-based decisions, which means that how it looks and feels on a digital palette's important. But what I am seeing though, Scott, it's interesting. It's a bit like a lot of processes, right? I remember when petrol stations went down a path of removing people serving you at the Bowser, and we had a lot of automation. Yet I'm reading trends now where, although you can pay via FPOS at the pump and not go inside, some people quite like the 25-meter walk inside, pay the attendant, stretch the legs, come back, and possibly get away from their children in the car. Yeah. But that whole paradigm is shifting. So I think where I'm going with this is that I think there's two things I can't speak for myself, but for my age and possibly older is, one, you need to embrace that they'll be well educated, and you want that, because if they're well educated, I look at it quite differently. A well educated customer who's researched the length degree of my product, I don't need to waste time with them in the preamble discovery process around what the product can do. Number two, they're happy to fail fast, so that they're a great audience for pilots. I'm seeing that in government. I mean, late last year here in Queensland, we were encouraged to apply for an IT procurement panel. This is a great share for your question, Scott, because having worked at a large incumbent 5 years ago, went through the same process, biggest brand in Australia. I had 6 people writing the response, and it took us 8 months and a couple of hundred verification questions, and in we went. Now, that was because our product was confusing a little bit. We used to make it smoke and mirrors. Pricing was difficult. Now, wind forward to Yabbit. Someone grabs Darren and says, you guys need to be on that panel. There's a lot of seriously interested people who want to see Yabbit on the government's panel, particularly around its mobile strength, any carrier access, etc., etc. So we dropped everything, and we spent 120 hours in 9 days. But we wrote and we authored the content for a younger audience, fast, snappy decision-making, modernized, elevated the language. When we were accepted with one verification question on one page, it was incredible. So there's opportunity, is my point. Be aware of it, embrace it. Know it's an educated audience, but where I think I land here is possibly the most important part is that, just like you and I are talking now, and you mentioned earlier about the UGM, the opportunity is that this generation that are so digitally literate and so fast in their decision making, there is so much value when you do get to them face to face. When you are with them, you actually get to give them something from, I'm a man of humour, Scott, yesteryear, our era. You get to give them something face to face in a room that they're not really that used to because they're so digitally proficient. And in my experience, I'm dealing with 35-year-old IT managers that are seriously on the rise, and they're doing really well in their roles. And when you do get to them, there's two things with getting to them. One, it's quite a new experience face to face. But two is, if you're in the room with them and they've qualified you and they've got access to all the information known to man, you're in the room for a reason.
Yeah, it's a proper meeting, isn't it? It's
brilliant.
It's
it can be a challenge when we get what I call a spread. It can be hard when we get two fast decision makers and someone who's maybe a bit older, of a different experience, who wants to slow the engine down and go back into risk adverse kind of behaviors. You've just got to remind them that the pandemic was a global reminder for all of us that tech should be able to spin and pivot quickly. Very unfortunately, the world was mobilized very quickly, and I think we as a generation now need to think about, can we keep moving at good speed around our technology? Do we have to be forced? Can we lead and not follow?
Yeah, no, I think again, we're of the same mind on that. I think it's you get on the COVID thing. The only thing we can guarantee is it's going to happen again. We just don't know when.
Yep.
And I think you're right. I think the industry did react well. I think it managed to do a very good job in that stuff. I think it's now becoming I think it's only now that the bigger guys, the bigger global players in terms of, enterprises and government, they put in very quick, rapid, kind of putty fixes, as we would call them.
Yep.
And now it's like, how do I harden that? How do I harden that? And how do I bake that agility into everything that I do moving forward? And particularly in government, where you've got, a sock drawer of technology through kind of 4-year procurement cycles. How do I kind of rationalize that? How do I then start to take central control of those things? None of them have got massive budgets either. That I think maybe we're not in an age of austerity again, but certainly they're not going to have money thrown at it to try and change these things. They're going to have to do this in a very smart, educated, intelligent way to kind of solve that long-term problem. And again, to finish off, is that I think that's where independent service providers absolutely do the best thing. That is a challenge that requires thought. It requires people to listen. It needs then the ability for you to orchestrate a solution that fits that particular need. I think you're ideally positioned to do very well, Chris, in that space.
Yeah, and even on that last point, just quickly, the sock drawer, like security is a great example, Scott. Security was seen to be an anchor, almost like a handbrake, and with the disruption of COVID, security now is actually an enabler because we are so mobilized. So we're learning quickly that vulnerabilities need to be addressed, but security has received more investment because it's needed, which is a bit different to the insurance policy it used to place. Another NetSapiens strength. Great security, great security in a platform. Go and build your products around the castle. Excellent.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, I'm obviously conscious that people haven't got an attention span more than 60 seconds nowadays when it comes to the video. But I think that's great. I'd love to do another session with you and expand a little bit more, I think, around some of these general opportunities that we see. Again, technology is great and all that kind of stuff, but I personally have a real desire to share business experiences amongst our partners as well. I think there's as much value comes from that as there is from, how they manage to adopt it or orchestrate our solution into fitting into a particular vertical need. But genuinely really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to meeting up with you in October.
Yeah, likewise, can't wait for the next one. And, we're on video, airplanes, cars. People are moving all the time. So I think the more we share, the better we do. And, I really appreciate the time, Scott. I'm looking forward to October 13. And, the next session, let's dig into a couple of, specific markets that need some innovation.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Take care. Thanks for the ashes.